You thought awakening would be beautiful. You imagined light, peace, maybe some clarity. But instead, you're losing sleep. You're snapping at people for no reason. You feel like a stranger in your own life. And worst of all, you can't even explain it. Everyone says you should be happy. You've found yourself, right? But it doesn't feel like finding anything. It feels like disintegration. The books you read don't help. The quotes don't land. Even your old goals seem childish now. You're not depressed. You're not broken. But you're not okay either. You're stuck in a silent collapse. Here's the brutal truth. Most people don't talk about what awakening actually feels like. It doesn't feel like elevation. It feels like erosion. And if that's what you're going through, you're not crazy. You're on the exact path Nietzsche warned us about. Because when the illusions shatter and the masks fall away, something terrifying happens. You see reality, raw, undressed, unforgiving. And not every soul can handle that. So the question is, why do most souls collapse during awakening? And what did Nietzsche see coming that we still refuse to admit today? Let's start with a myth. You've heard it before. Awakening is supposed to be light, gentle, uplifting. That's how it looks in the books. That's how it sounds in the speeches. But that's not how it feels when it actually happens. Awakening isn't like turning on a lamp. It's like having your skin ripped off in the dark. The ego doesn't go quietly. It claws. It negotiates. It pretends to agree, then pulls you back into old patterns. What you feel right now, that instability, that sense of groundlessness, it's not failure. It's the friction of something deeper waking up inside you. Nietzsche knew this. He lived it. He wrote, "If you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." Why? Because awakening is not a step upward. It's a fall into your own abyss, where everything you believe to be true gets tested. Think about it. You start to question everything: your parents, your job, your partner, your goals, even your religion, even your idea of who you are. That's not spiritual progress, that's an existential crisis. But here's the twist. That crisis is the progress. Nietzsche didn't believe in comforting illusions. He believed in destruction. Creative destruction. The collapse of fake virtue, fake strength, fake meaning. Because only after the collapse can something real begin. This isn't about enlightenment. It's about endurance. Not everyone makes it through. Not everyone should. Awakening isn't for the chosen. It's for the courageous. And courage doesn't feel like strength. It feels like chaos. And here's what makes it worse. Nobody around you sees it. To them, you're just being difficult. Overthinking. You used to be so easygoing. You scroll past words like rebirth, alignment, purpose. You repost quotes about healing and boundaries, but deep down, you're just tired, empty, quietly unraveling. You show up to meetings, nodding at ideas you don't believe in. You laugh at group chats you've muted. You keep a gratitude journal but don't feel grateful. Everything looks fine, and that's what makes it worse. You're not overthinking. You're awakening. And awakening is lonely. Because while you're questioning everything, the world keeps pretending. Pretending that success still means status, that love means sacrifice, that peace means comfort. But you've seen the cracks. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. Ask yourself, what beliefs are collapsing in you right now? What part of your old self feels impossible to carry forward? So if everything in you feels like it's breaking, good. Because the next step isn't to fix it. It's to face it. One fracture at a time. Collapse doesn't always look like destruction. It doesn't always come with sirens or storms. Sometimes it looks like a steady job, a calm demeanor, a clean house. Sometimes it wears the face of someone who has it together. But underneath, something is quietly crumbling. Ever feel like you're doing everything right, but still feel wrong inside? Collapse can be silent. It can hide in success. It can even look like peace, like a smiling photo on social media that hides 1,000 unread messages, like a cathedral with a cracked foundation, still standing, still sacred, but hollowed from within. And if you don't pay attention, you'll keep walking through its halls, lighting candles to a life that's already gone cold. So in the next chapters, we're not looking for chaos. We're looking for the subtle fractures, the everyday masks, the beautiful ruins. These are the hidden faces of collapse. And if you recognize even one of them in yourself, it doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're finally starting to see. You wake up one day and feel like a guest in your own body. You don't recognize your voice in meetings. You reread your texts before sending them, wondering who you're trying to sound like. You laugh, but it doesn't feel real. And the scary part? No one around you notices. That's how identity collapse begins. Quietly, not with a crisis, but with a whisper. Who am I, really? This is the first fracture in awakening. The unraveling of the self you built to be accepted, to succeed, to belong. The job title, the relationship role, the good student, the fixer, the rebel. Whatever mask you wore, it's starting to crack. At first you try harder. You overcompensate. More productivity, more smiles, more perfectly timed reactions. But the harder you try, the emptier it feels. Because deep down something in you knows, this isn't who you are anymore. Nietzsche called this the death of God, not about religion, but about the collapse of inherited meaning. When your internal compass stops pointing north because it never truly belonged to you. Psychologists call it depersonalization. Philosophers call it existential disorientation. But you just feel lost. And that lostness bleeds into everything. You start zoning out in conversations. You scroll endlessly. You stare at the ceiling at 2 a.m., not because you're anxious, but because you feel nothing. The cause isn't failure, it's exposure. Awakening exposes the version of you that was designed for applause, not truth. Imagine a house filled with mirrors. Each room reflects a different version of you, the achiever, the lover, the fighter. You've walked through those rooms your whole life. But one day, the mirrors crack. You see nothing. Just a wall. A silence. And that silence terrifies you. Because in that moment you realize you weren't living. You were performing. You said yes to projects you hated. You laughed at jokes that made you feel small. You wore outfits for approval, not comfort. You sacrificed sleep to meet expectations that didn't even come from you. You weren't choosing. You were repeating. And now you don't know what's left. This is the first collapse, not of life, but of illusion. And as painful as it is, it's also necessary. Because only by losing who you thought you were, can you begin to discover who you actually are. At first it feels like drifting, but slowly, that silence becomes something else. Not clarity, not confidence, but honesty. And that's where the real you begins. You won't rebuild your identity overnight, but you can start with a single question. What parts of me feel honest, even when no one is watching? That's your compass, not the loudest part, the truest. Write it down, whisper it, let it live somewhere, because that's where your next self begins, not in answers, but in attention. You meditate, you journal, you say no more often. On the surface, it looks like you're healing. People even tell you, you've changed, you seem calmer. But deep inside, something feels fake. You're not calmer, you're numb, you're not healed, you're detached. This is the second collapse. And it's dangerous because it wears a smile. It's what psychologists call spiritual bypassing, using self-help to avoid the actual self. It's the illusion of progress, while silently avoiding the pain that truly transforms. You post quotes about boundaries and healing. You unfollow people who trigger you. You light incense and call it self-care. But the truth? You're hiding behind rituals because you're terrified of going deeper. You say, I'm protecting my energy, when you're really avoiding hard conversations. You call it detachment, but it's just fear in disguise. You curate your feed like a sanctuary, but still scroll for hours in quiet panic. You've become fluent in the language of growth, but you've forgotten how to feel. When was the last time you cried without a reason, or sat with your discomfort without trying to fix it? You're reading the right books, quoting the right thinkers, maybe even guiding others. But when you're alone, you still feel hollow, not because you're failing, but because you're skipping the real work. Nietzsche saw this too. He warned that morality, when used as a shield, becomes another mask. A prettier one, yes, but still a mask. Growth becomes performance. Peace becomes suppression. The result? You lose touch with your rage, your grief, your real hunger for meaning. Not because they're gone, but because you've buried them under positive affirmations and perfectly curated aesthetics. Imagine building a glass temple to hide a fire. It looks divine. It glows from the outside. But step too close, and you feel nothing. No warmth, no life. You didn't escape your pain. You froze it. And that's not awakening. That's avoidance dressed in robes. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you let someone see your mess? When was the last time you said, "I don't know," without shame? If you can't remember, you might not be growing. You might be hiding. And hiding even behind beauty is still collapse. The truth is, real peace doesn't come from avoiding conflict. It comes from surviving it, feeling it, and refusing to run. You start speaking differently. You question things others accept without thought. Small talk drains you. Crowds feel suffocating. Your old friends begin to fade away, not because of a fight, but because the space between your realities has grown too wide. You didn't leave them. You just outgrew the mask you used to wear around them. This is the third collapse, the collapse of belonging. And it's one of the most painful, because no one tells you that awakening makes you lonelier before it makes you stronger. Nietzsche lived this exile. He wasn't celebrated. He wasn't understood. He walked alone, not because he wanted to, but because he refused to shrink himself for the comfort of others. In his own words, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." At first, you try to hold on. You explain yourself. You translate your new thoughts into their old language, but it doesn't work. And eventually you realize the path forward doesn't include everyone. Here's the twist. You're not just losing people. You're shedding versions of yourself that needed them. That's the exile effect. It's not punishment. It's purification. But here's the part that stings. No one comes to save you. You don't get a text saying, "I see your growth." No one checks in. No one asks the questions you crave. You become invisible. Not because you're lesser, but because you've stopped playing their game. And in that silence, you will be tempted to go back, to shrink again, to apologize for your evolution. But don't. You walk alone so that when you speak again, it's your voice. Not your fear. Not your need to be liked. Not the echo of someone else's beliefs. Just you, unmasked, untamed, whole. And yes, that's terrifying, but it's also sacred, because only in exile can your truth echo loud enough for you to finally hear it. And when you do, you won't need to be found. You'll realize you were never truly lost. You wake up and something is missing. Not your job, not your relationship, not your health, something deeper. You can't name it, but you feel it. A dull emptiness that no success, no praise, no morning routine can touch. This is the fourth collapse, the collapse of meaning. You used to have goals, things that excited you, milestones that felt worth chasing. But now it's all blurry. The promotions, the plans, the bucket list. None of it sparks anything. You're not sad. You're not angry. You're just tired of pretending that it all matters. Nietzsche saw this long before the modern world caught up. He called it nihilism, the moment when all inherited values lose their grip. When the scaffolding of meaning you were raised on starts to dissolve. He wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what happens when you lose the why? You keep functioning. You answer emails. You smile at neighbors. But inside, you're in a desert, surrounded by sand, nothing solid to hold on to. That's the danger. Because collapse of meaning doesn't look dramatic. It's subtle. It hides behind perfection, behind discipline, behind "I'm fine." And the worst part? It makes everything else feel fake. The praise, the plans, even the people you love. Not because they are fake, but because the lens you once saw them through, the lens of purpose, is gone. You start asking questions you can't answer. Why am I doing this? What's the point? Why keep going? You stare at the ceiling in the morning, not out of dread, but blankness. You wonder, why get up at all? And you're afraid to say those questions out loud. Because what if there is no answer? So now the real question is this. If the world no longer hands you meaning, will you dare to build it yourself? Will you take that unbearable emptiness and carve something into it? Will you claim authorship even when the page is blank? But here's the twist. This isn't the end. This is the threshold. You're not empty. You're clear. The old meanings had to die, not because they were wrong, but because they were inherited. And now, for the first time, you get to build your own. Not based on what others call success. Not based on fear or obligation, but on truth. This is what Nietzsche meant by becoming who you are. The collapse of meaning isn't death, it's rebirth. And yes, it's terrifying to create value from nothing. But that's what real awakening demands, that you stop waiting for meaning to be given and start daring to create it yourself. And if you're still here, still listening, thank you. It means you're not just watching this, you're walking through it. Here it is. The reason most souls collapse during awakening isn't because they're weak. It's because they've been lied to. They were told awakening is beautiful. They were told healing is peaceful. They were told growth is graceful. But it's not. Awakening is violent. Healing is chaotic. Growth is brutal. And most people aren't collapsing. They're being peeled open. The truth is, becoming who you are requires the death of who you were. And death, even metaphorical, is messy. Nietzsche didn't romanticize this process. He didn't speak in affirmations. He spoke in fire. He wrote, "You must be willing to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you rise anew if you have not first become ashes?" This is the truth most people run from. Because becoming ashes means surrendering control. It means losing your reputation, your routines, your rituals. It means standing in the ruins of your old self, with no guarantee that something better will rise. But Nietzsche believed that's the only way something real can rise. Not a better version of your ego, not a prettier mask, but your actual self. And here's the brutal truth. Most people would rather be unhappy and accepted than real and alone. Most people would rather belong to the herd than walk as a sovereign. Most people don't collapse during awakening. They retreat. Because awakening doesn't just ask you to feel more, it asks you to lose more. Your illusions, your safety, your excuses, your comfort. And what do you get in return? Silence. At first. But then, something stirs. Not a revelation. Not a miracle. Something smaller. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop pretending. You stop negotiating with your truth. And that's when the real awakening begins. Not when you feel good, but when you feel real. When the collapse is complete, and all that remains is you. So what happens after the collapse? You don't wake up one day reborn. There's no moment of clarity where everything clicks. No fireworks, no applause. Just a slow return. To breath, to choice, to stillness. You begin to respond instead of react. You pause before the spiral. You walk away from what no longer fits. Not in anger, but in peace. And it's subtle. At first, no one sees it, but you feel it. The silence that once felt unbearable now feels sacred. The loneliness that once stung now feels like freedom. You no longer seek meaning from the outside. You create it. In how you show up, in how you speak, in what you choose to carry, and what you finally set down. This is where real self-help begins. Not in becoming better, but in becoming honest. You stop asking, how can I fix myself? And start asking, what's no longer true about me? And from that question, a new self begins to form. Not a perfect one, not a complete one, but a self that belongs to you. You realize your boundaries aren't walls, they're clarity. Your voice isn't too much, it's your compass. Your pain isn't weakness, it's where your power breathes. And yes, you'll still fall, you'll still get lost. But now, you'll know the way back. Because you've walked through fire, not once, but again and again. And each time, you came back more whole. Not because you avoided collapse, but because you faced it and kept walking. That is transformation, not the removal of darkness, but the birth of light that doesn't need to be seen to be real. You become the quiet force, the steady flame, the one who knows. Meaning is not given, it's made, and it's made by those who dared to collapse and rise without asking for permission. You return to the same room you once feared, the same faces, the same noise, the same expectations, but something's different. Not them. You. You don't flinch at their silence. You don't chase their approval. You don't explain yourself the way you used to. You just stand there. Still. Present. Unshaken. Not because you've mastered life, but because you've met yourself. And that changes everything. You've stopped asking the world for permission to exist. You no longer need to be chosen to feel worthy. You don't need to be understood to feel clear. The collapse didn't destroy you. It revealed you. And now, even in the noise, you carry silence. Even in the chaos, you move with calm. Even when unseen, you remain whole. Not because you found answers, but because you stopped abandoning the questions. You no longer seek the light. You are the spark, and somewhere quietly, someone watching you will feel it. They'll sense the calm you fought for, the depth you bled for, the truth you refused to bury. They won't know your story, but they'll feel your presence. And in that moment, you'll understand. You didn't awaken to be understood. You awakened to be real, and that's more than enough. If this spoke to something in you, not your mind, but the part of you you've been quieting for too long, let it breathe. Don't just move on to the next video. Sit with what cracked. Sit with what clicked. This wasn't content. It was a mirror. And mirrors only work when you're willing to look. If you're still here, it means something in you is still listening, still watching, still walking. So here's the ritual. Not a subscription, not a like, a decision. To keep collapsing when it's time to shed. To keep creating when it's time to rise. If you need the reminder again, it'll be here. And if you know someone else quietly breaking apart, silently searching, send this to them. Don't explain. Just share. Some awakenings begin in silence, some in fire, some with a whisper from someone just like you.